That day will be preceded by Fimbulvetter, a winter that will last 3 years. The cold will be terrible, but the moral decay will be even more so. Brother will rise in violence against brother and uncle against nephew. Impurity will take no heed of blood kinship. It will be a time of axe and sword, wind and wolf. These beasts will rise to swallow the sun and the moon, and the stars will cease to give light. A great earthquake will give the signal of the final confrontation. The bonds that hold the world together will be loosened, and the giants will march against Asgard. The ship Naglfar, made of the nails of the dead, will finally be ready, and Loki, freed from his shackles, will pilot it, bringing the enemies of the Aesir to their doorstep. The fire giant Surtur empties Muspel of its folk, and they attempt to cross the Bifrost bridge to enter Asgard. But the bridge gives in under their weight. In the midst of the confusion, Heimdall's horn blows together the gods and their allies to battle. Odin turns one more time to the severed head of the wise Mimir for counsel, but the doom is unavoidable. The All-Father prepared for this one moment during the entire cycle. He gathered in his hall the finest warriors among men, feasting them continuously and letting them fight. Every Einherjar fallen in the fight in Odin's hall would immediately get up for another fight and to continue the feasting. But now all this is over. Heimdall's horn gathers them on the field called Vigrid. Thor grabs Mjolnir and is ready for his old nemesis. They have a score to settle. Odin rides to battle on Sleipnir and once again carries his trusted spear Gungnir. A long time ago, when the world was young, he threw Gungnir over the head of the Vanir host, in that war to begin all wars. This time he faces the war to end all strife, and the world itself. The two hosts clash as no two hosts clashed before. Heimdall and Loki face down each other, and the time for self-restraint is in the past. Frey regrets now to have given his sword to Skimir, but he has no much time for regrets now. Thor and the world serpent attack each other, and this time Hymir is not there to separate them. The serpent dies with his head crushed, but the red-bearded protector of man can't escape the serpent's poison. Odin himself dies, killed by Fenrir, while the Einherjar kill and are killed all around him, and this time nobody rises. Vidar, seeing his father dead, turns on the wolf and puts his giant leather boot on his lower jaw. He grabs Fenrir's upper jaw and tears apart the beast once and for all. The world tree, Yggdrasil, is shaking and cracking violently. Two humans, a man and a woman, seek shelter under its protection. All around them the flames of Surtur engulf the world, and the world crumbles in heaps of ash. The end has come. Or has it? The Völva, the prophetess who predicts all this to Odin, sees more. Yggdrasil, though badly tried, is still standing. After the end of the old world, the grass will grow green again, the eagle will soar, and the survivors among the gods will return to Asgard, only to find their golden toys in the grass. The two humans peep out to see if it's safe for them to leave the hiding place. Balder returns from the dead and takes the place of his father. A new cycle is ready to commence. But all this is still in the future. Norse people used to cut the nails of their dead before putting them in their graves, because the ship Naglfar will be made of these. And they also used to throw pieces of leather for Vidar's boot. He will need a big one when he steps on Fenrir's jaw. So how much until Naglfar is ready and Loki is unbound? Is it already sailing, or we still have time? The clue, given us by the long winter, lasting for 3 years, should be telling. In certain Catholic prophecies, there's talk about a night lasting for 3 nights. At that time the believers should gather in their houses and not go out. There will be no light at all except from blessed candles. The demons will be loosened on earth, and nobody should open the door or the window for any reason. The faithful should stay in, praying the rosary, ignoring what is happening outside. That way they will be protected. Now, the year and the day are two analogous cycles. They are organized the same way. Morning spring, followed by noon summer, afternoon autumn, and finally night winter. The Fimbulvetter and the Night of the Demons tell us that this will happen when our cycle will reach its very end, at a time of complete darkness. Are we there yet? And what will come afterward? It has been suggested that the decay is already sufficiently advanced to make us look into the near future for the end. Renegenon expected the end of the Kali Yuga around the end of the 20th century. In the same time, Julius Evola was absolutely convinced that modernity is something altogether special in the history of mankind. In the beginning of his revolt against the modern world, he says, quote, The considerations that follow will constantly revolve around the opposition between the modern and the traditional world, and between the modern and traditional man. Such an opposition is ideal, that is, morphological and metaphysical, and both beyond and more than merely historical applications. And then he also says, the modern world and the traditional world may be regarded as two universal types and as two a priori categories of civilization. End quote. If modernity is such a special age and so destructive, then the end must be nigh. Guénon is a bit more sanguine when it comes to modernity, though. Quote, for everything that has any kind of existence, even error, has necessarily its reason for existence, and disorder itself must in the end find its place among the elements of universal order. Thus, whereas the modern world considered in itself is an anomaly, and even a sort of monstrosity, it is no less true that when viewed in relation to the whole historical cycle of which it is part, it corresponds exactly to the conditions pertaining to a certain phase of that cycle, the phase that the Hindu tradition specifies as the final period of the Kali Yuga, or as he says in French, le période extrême du Kali Yuga. That's from The Reign of Quantity and the Science of Times, page 1. So Guénon at least admitted some semblance of legitimacy to modernity, though he identified it with the last stage of the last subcycle. On my part, I think modernity is neither an anomaly nor a monstrosity, and consequently I'm not expecting its imminent demise. The feeling that we are at an end is not without justification. It's just that what is being prepared now is not the end of the cycle. Something else is ending now. The last stage of the Iron Age is close, but it's still in the future. This famous last stage will not come until the second fall of humanity. The first fall was the one that ended the Golden Age, and with it history began. The second fall will put an end to history, and will consume the last vestiges of the cycle, creating the conditions for a rebirth. If we turn to the principles behind historical becoming, we can guess ourselves what this last stage will look like. I'm afraid traditionalists like Guénon and Evola disliked so much modernity that they were readily inclined to identify it with the closing of the cycle. But this is impossible. Modernity is, quite evidently, the age of the third estate, the bourgeoisie. So it is the reign of economic power and material achievement, reflected in the political realm as the rule of the order demos, or democracy. This is not very spiritual, granted, but it doesn't have to be. For a more spiritual age, we should look towards the beginning of the cycle. The question for us is, can we fall even further than where we are right now? Well, I have good news for you. As admirers of a famous US president are fond of saying, yes, we can. And that is because the bourgeoisie is not the lowest of the classes. That is the fourth estate, and the cycle will not end until we see a society modeled according to the values of the lowest class. In other words, the cycle will not end until we see the advent of dulocracy. In the Golden Age, there was only one social class among people, because the rulers were immortal daimons, sent by the demiurge, as we saw previously when we went through what Plato says about the reign of Kronos in a previous video. But once human society was governed by humans, social distinctions had to appear between the rulers and the ruled. Therefore, society divided itself according to the faculties of the soul in those called to know, those called to act, and those called to have. The priestly class is responsible with passing down the sacred knowledge under the form of tradition, and to read and interpret the great book of the cosmos. The aristocracy is called to fight disorder and other perils that come from within and from without a given society. The third estate is called to assure the material well-being of all. Just as the soul is divided in mind, willpower, and desires, society is divided in priests, aristocracy, and the third estate. In the course of time, in a descending order, all these classes got their chance to realize their vision of the Golden Age. The priestly caste was to be the first before great technological achievements and military empires. This was the age that left the fewest traces because its successes were not material or political in nature. In his book Spiritual Authority and Temporal Power, René Guénon sketches the Atlantean revolt of the warrior class against the spiritual authority of the priests. In our relatively recent history, we saw the triumph of the third estate, of the bourgeoisie. Only one thing is left, the fourth estate, the serfs and the slaves. We already had the foretaste of what that might look like with communism. That was openly a regime of the servile class. But the real thing is around the corner still. We will not see it realized before the completion of the second fall. Before discussing this fall, however, let's follow the text of Ovid and Hesiod that we left at the Bronze and Heroic races respectively, and let's see what they have to say about the Iron Age. If you found this video before listening to that one about the 4 ages in the classical tradition, you will find a link to that one below in the description box. This is what Hesiod has to say, starting with line 169 of the Works and Days. Quote, "And again far-seeing Zeus made yet another generation, the 5th of men who are upon the bounteous earth. Thereafter, would that I were not among the men of the 5th generation, but either had died before or been born afterwards. For now truly is a race of iron, and men never rest from labour and sorrow by day, and from perishing by night, and the gods shall lay sore trouble upon them. But notwithstanding, even these shall have some good mingled with their evils. And Zeus will destroy this race of mortal men also, when they come to have grey hair on the temples at their birth. The father will not agree with his children, nor the children with their father, nor guest with his host, nor comrade with comrade, nor will brother be dear to brother as aforetime. Men will dishonour their parents as they grow quickly old, and will carp at them, chiding them with bitter words. Hard-hearted they, not knowing the fear of the gods. They will not repay their aged parents the cost of their nurture, for might shall be their right, and one man will sack another city. There will be no favour for the man who keeps his oath, or for the just, or for the good, but rather man will praise the evildoer and his violent dealing. Strength will be right, and reverence will cease to be, and the wicked will hurt the worthy man, speaking false words against him, and will swear an oath upon them. Envy, foul-mouthed, delighting in evil, with scowling face, will go along with wretched man, one and all. And then Aidos and Nemesis, with their sweet forms wrapped in white robes, will go from the white path earth and forsake mankind to join the company of the deathless gods. And bitter sorrows will be left for mortal man, and there will be no help against evil." End quote. What Ovid says in the Metamorphoses is quite similar. The age of hard iron came last. Straightway all evil burst forth in this age of baser vein. Modesty and truth and faith fled the earth, and in their place came tricks and plots and snares, violence and cursed love of gain. Men now spread sails to the winds, though the sailors as yet scarce knew them. And keels of pine, which long had stood upon high mountain sides, now leaped insolently over unknown waves. And the ground, which had hitherto been a common possession, like the sunlight and the air, the careful surveyor now marked out with long-drawn boundary line. Not only did men demand of the bounteous field the crops and sustenance they owed, but they delved as well into the very bowels of earth, and the wealth which the Creator had hidden away and buried deep amid the very Stygian shades was brought to light, wealth that pricks men on to crime. And now baneful iron had come, and gold more baneful than iron. War came, which fights with both, and brandished in its bloody hands the clashing arms. Man lived on plunder. Guest was not safe from host, nor father-in-law for son-in-law. Even among brothers 'twas rare to find affection. The husband longed for the death of his wife, she of her husband's. Murderous stepmothers brewed deadly poison, and sons inquired into their father's ears before the time. Piety lay vanquished, and the maiden Astrea, last of the immortals, abandoned the blood-soaked earth." End quote. The most important characteristic of this age seems to be strife and conflict, which corresponds to the loss of political art. Also, Ovid, harkening back to the other authors before him, insists on the propensity of people to travel far from their home. Both poets speak about divine characters that will leave humanity during this age. But if we look closer to these goddesses, things become somewhat complicated. In the case of Hesiod, all is clear. Shame and punishment, or Aidos and Nemesis, that will leave us, are the 2 goddesses that were given to mankind by Zeus to impart political wisdom and make possible life in common. As we have seen previously, in the Platonic dialogue Protagoras, the titular character mentions Aidos and Dike as having been sent by the father of the gods, through Hermes to our ancestors. And we have seen that this happened at the beginning of the Silver Age. Their role is to make life possible to us mortals after the end of the Golden Age. Notice that Dike, or justice, has simply become Nemesis, or just punishment. In the Golden Age, people lived according to justice by their nature and without compulsion. It came to them naturally. That is why there was no need for laws or judges or magistrates. When justice is not inherent in the human soul anymore, it has to be administered from outside by a political authority. But that transformation from the conditions of the Golden Age to that of the subsequent ages is not a one-time event. After the advent of the Silver Age, justice and shame are still inherent in the soul to a degree, but this degree is always diminishing with the passage of time. The more justice leaves the soul of man, the more external justice there has to be in order to keep things in line, and the more harsh and intolerable it will appear to those with unjust souls. Towards the end, all that is left of decay is nemesis, because justice has left completely the souls, and all that is left is external justice, meted out by political authority. This has already happened, I think, because we live in a culture that actively encourages habits and cravings that break the harmony of the soul, rendering it agitated. Our culture is not one that simply forgot the classical paideia, or education, that is supposed to render the souls harmonious, and therefore just. Our culture is actively working against those ideals, making every effort to deform souls by subjecting the higher faculties to the tyranny of the lower faculties. There have always been people with injustice in their soul, and in historic times we can say that in any given society they were the majority. What late modernity has brought us is a culture that actively cultivates the subjugation of the higher faculties to the lower ones, and the marginalization of everything that could represent a challenge to this novelty. In such conditions, all that remains of decay is nemesis, or justice as external coercion. But Hesiod goes further. He says that towards the end even nemesis will be taken away. In other words, even external correction will collapse, and this implies the disintegration of political authority. There will be a time when even the external shell of justice will disintegrate, leaving behind a war of all against all without any possibility of organized communities. As Hesiod says in the beginning of his description, even the iron race will have some good mingled with evil, but once nemesis has left us, there will be no more good left. What Ovid says, however, complicates somewhat this picture. He mentions the maiden Astrea as being the last one to leave us. Who is this maiden? According to Aratus, she is justice and she is the constellation Virgo. And this is where things get complicated, because according to Aratus, she was here with us in the Golden Age, and she left in the Bronze Age already, ascending in the sky, where we can see her these days. Let's see what Aratus has to say about her. But another tale is current among men, how of old she dwelt on earth and met man face to face, nor ever disdained in olden time the tribes of men and women, but mingling with them took her seat, immortal though she was. Her men called justice, but she, assembling the elders, it might be in the marketplace or in the wide-way streets, uttered her voice, ever urging on them judgments kinder to people. Not yet in that age had men knowledge of hateful strife, or carping contention, or din of battle, but a simple life they lived. Far from them was the cruel sea, and not yet from afar did ships bring their livelihood, but the oxen and the plough, and justice herself, queen of peoples, giver of things just, abundantly supplied their every need. Even so long as the earth still nurtured the golden race, she had her dwelling on earth, but with the silver race only a little, and no longer with utter readiness did she mingle. For that she yearned for the ways of the men of old. Yet in that silver age was she still upon earth. But from echoing hills at eventide she came alone, nor spake to any man in gentle words. But when she had filled the great heights with gathering crowds, then would she with threats rebuke their evil ways, and declare that never more at their prayer would she reveal her face to man. Behold what manner of race the fathers of the golden age left behind them, far meaner than themselves, but ye will breed a viler progeny. Verily wars and cruel bloodshed shall be unto men, and grievous woe shall be laid upon them. Even so she spake, and sought the hills, and left the people all gazing towards her still. But when they too were dead, and when more ruinous than they which went before the race of bronze was born, who were the first to forge the sword of the highwayman, and the first to eat the flesh of ploughing ox, then verily did justice loathe the race of man, and fly heavenwards, and took up that abode, when even now, in the night time, the maiden is seen of man. That's Aratus Phenomena, verses 96 to 136. So what's the connection between Astrea and decay, since they are both identified with justice? Astrea, as described by Aratus, is justice as she is in the golden age and lingers on for some time afterwards. She is the justice inherent in the soul of a just man. In the meantime, decay that came among men at the beginning of the Silver Age, as a guarantor of social order, is external justice that orders a political community. According to Aratus, Astrea left us already at the advent of the Bronze Age, when strife and enmity became the hallmark of human existence. Ovid, on the other hand, has her leave us sometime during the present Iron Age. Which one of them is correct? Well, both. The Bronze Age introduced in the history of humanity a civilization based on warfare and strife. This redefined human character. In the Golden Age there was peace between humans and animals and between humans themselves. The Silver Age ended the good relation with the animal kingdom, and according to the Platonic Protagoras, political organization among humans started as a defense measure against animals. What the Bronze Age seemed to have brought as novelty was a polity defined by aggression against other human polities. Taking this in consideration, it is understandable that Aratus would consider this age as an especially low point, expressing it through the mythological image of the maiden ascending to the sky vault. In another sense, however, interior justice is still with us in the Iron Age, though Virgil thought of her as being ascended and he wrote about her as about to return, with the supposed return of the Golden Age under Augustus Caesar. So it's safe to say that Ovid also would look upon the constellation and think that she is already up there. As far as I'm concerned, the fact that the constellation Virgo is up there does not mean that Astrea has completely left us. After all, as above, so below, as the Tabula Smaragdina so eloquently reminds us. So even if the maiden is up there, the light of those stars still reaches this world of generation and corruption under the sphere of the moon. So let's remember what justice is according to its classical meaning to see if some semblance of it still remains down here. In the proper sense, justice consists in putting everything in the place where it naturally belongs. A just soul, for instance, is a soul that has been ordered so that the lower faculties are put in the service of the higher faculties, and all of them work together for the good of the diversified whole. A just society is ordered along the same lines as the individual soul because of the analogy between the micro and macrocosm. People whose vocation in life is defined by their lower faculties constitute the lower classes. Those that are called to cultivate especially the intermediate faculties constitute the aristocracy, while the cultivation of the highest faculties is the domain of the priestly class, that has to provide the knowledge necessary for a good government. As we advance through the cycle, we witness the rise in importance of lower faculties and lower classes. Modernity is defined by the third estate connected to economic power and technological advance. In this period, the proper disposition of the soul will be about cultivating the faculties that make possible economic success and technological advancement. This regime will favor democracy in politics because political equality eliminates the special place of aristocracy and clergy that defined the old regime. Differentiation is supposed to be economical and technological, not political. Modernity closes many doors for us humans, keeping us trapped in the material world with its limitations and calling this entrapment freedom. But this is according to the providential unfolding of the cycle. Lower faculties can reach their full potential only when they escape the rule of the higher faculties, and lower classes can achieve the maximum of their potential when they are freed from the influence of the higher classes. This is, in fact, the engine behind the descending tendency of the cycle. Every new stage creates the conditions for a new possibility to actualize itself, until all the possibilities within the cycle have been actualized, at one time or another. Now, if modernity is about differentiation according to material considerations, then the justice proper to this age will be about putting everything in its place according to material considerations. This is not justice as it should apply to the whole cycle, but it is justice as it applies to this particular subcycle. In this context, the soul that cultivates the faculties adapted to this particular subcycle is a just soul within the given context. A man who finds fulfillment and self-discipline in following the dream of material success is following the dictates of providence for this age. Since justice is about just differentiation and putting things in their proper place, modernity allows for justice only in the material domain. A spiritual path is possible only by following what has been left behind from past ages, and in politics we have equality, which is unjust by its nature. Equality is the very opposite of differentiation. And yet as long as justice as natural differentiation is possible, we still have a residue of justice left, even if it's only in the domain of material goods. Taking all this in consideration, I can't agree with Guénon and Evola that modernity is in a category all of its own, and that it represents something qualitatively different from traditional societies. In fact, I think that the dividing line should not be put between pre-modern traditional societies and modernity, but between the Golden Age and all the rest of the cycle. The great qualitative separation happened at the fall, and the birth of modernity does not show the characteristics of something equivalent. What modernity is a natural continuation of the descent within the cycle, and everything bad that we can say about it can be said analogously about the revolt of the aristocracy against the priestly class that happened long in the past. We have seen already in the poem of Aratus that the advent of the Bronze race and its warlike character chased Astrea away from the earth, up among the stars. If the revolt of the Third Estate against the aristocracy and the clergy at the dawn of modernity was illegitimate, can't we say the very same thing about the Atlantean revolt of the warrior class against their priestly betters that René Guénon talks about repeatedly? Modernity is less original than we might think. It is simply the next natural step. Substituting an inferior class to a superior one is not new. It happened before, when the primordial tradition was redefined from a polar one to a solar one, that Guénon attributes to events on the Atlantean continent. Also, the fact that humans now seem so wicked is not an argument, I think, for considering modernity as something special. Keep in mind the impression left on Astrea by the Bronze Age. She was so horrified that she could not stay with us humans any longer. And who can blame her? When you have a wholesale redefinition of political communities as war camps in struggle between humans, as was the case in the Bronze Age, you have before your eyes a whole new level of wickedness. Modernity simply makes one more step downwards. Now, I do realize that what I'm saying here is something that nobody in the traditionalist community ever said. I'm somewhat hesitant to put before a public ideas that are, well, original. Disciples of Guénon and Evola never talked the way I do about these things. But what I'm saying here comes, I think, from a systematic application of the very principles that define traditionalism. My impression is that Evola and Guénon let themselves carried away in their opposition to modernity so much that they exaggerated its importance. And this is quite understandable, since modernity is the age that we live in now and that affects us. But understandable does not mean correct. I already mentioned that after the first fall, that from the Golden Age to the Silver Age, there will be another fall that will be its equivalent. Already in the text that we saw this far, we find important hints. Hesiod mentions that even in the Iron Age we still have some good mingled with evil. But there will be a time when Aidos and Nemesis will leave us. Without them, as we have seen in the Platonic Protagoras, no human association is possible, so there will be nothing good left. This will happen when the last vestige of justice will be removed, and that has to do with the advent of the Fourth Estate. We have already seen in the case of communism that the rule of the Fourth Estate is about equalization. This is in direct contradiction to justice's natural differentiation. We still have a regime that recognizes some residue of natural differentiation, at least in the economic domain, even if it's hostile to anything similar in the spiritual or political domain. But the Fourth Estate is about the cancelling out of anything resembling natural differentiation, and that will put an end to justice in any meaningful sense of the word. It will do this, of course, in the name of equality, and the agents of change will think that they are fighting for justice, because they redefine justice as equality. When a new society of complete equality will be implemented by removing the so-called injustice of economic differentiation, then Hesiod's prophecy about the departure of Aidos and Nemesis will be fulfilled. At least that is how I read the Signs of Times. Another interesting prophecy that presents this explicitly as a second fall, equivalent in importance to the first one, is to be found in Plato's Symposium, from the mouth of Aristophanes. The Platonic character of Aristophanes describes the first fall in the following terms. There was a time when humans were round and they had 4 arms and 4 legs. When they became full of pride, Zeus cut them in half, leaving humans as they are now, with 2 hands and 2 legs and always craving for the other separated half. This Platonic legend about the origin of erotic attraction is fairly well known, as it is still present in popular culture when we talk about finding our half. But this is not the whole story. The text says that as we grow too haughty and forget the reverence due to the gods, there will be consequences. Quote, "They shall walk upright on 2 legs, but if I find they still run riot and do not keep the peace," he said, "I will cut them in 2 again, and they will have to make their way on 1 leg hopping." That's from the Symposium 190d. And in case the reader glosses over this remark, Plato repeats the same thing a few paragraphs later. Quote, "So there's a danger that if we don't keep order before the gods, we'll be split in 2 again, and then we'll be walking around in the condition of people carved on gravestones in bas-relief, sewn apart between the nostrils, like half dice. We should encourage all men, therefore, to treat the gods with all due reverence, so that we may escape this fate and find wholeness instead. And we will, if love is our guide and our commander." That's from the Symposium 193a. Let's unpack this a bit. The first separation that is mentioned is the one between the sexes. This corresponds to the same reality that Hesiod describes as the creation of Pandora. These are two mythic images of the same thing. We also know that according to tradition, in the Golden Age, humans sprang from earth and did not multiply through sex. Plato mentions as much in the Statesman, and in that dialogue it is taken as common knowledge. So the separation of the sexes and the necessity of reunion of humans through erotic love has to do with the passage from the Golden Age to the Silver Age. In other words, what Plato describes here in the Symposium is the fall of humanity from the Golden Age. But Plato, through the voice of his character Aristophanes, mentions a second division, analogous to the first. What we have here is the description of a second fall analogous to the first one. We have already seen an event that happened at the beginning of the Silver Age that has a counterpart at the beginning of the last stage of the Iron Age. When the Silver Race was still young, it received aidos and decay, shame and justice, as guarantors of good order and political community. So these two goddesses have a role in bringing people together to form a whole. Eros is also something that is given to mankind at the separation of the sexes in order to bring people together and create a whole. But Aidos and Nemesis will leave us at a certain point during the Iron Age, and we saw when and why. Here, Eros, the god of love, is presented to us as a divinity to which we have to give honor if we don't want to fall to even smaller pieces. Let's explore these realities further by going beyond the mythical imagery in which they are wrapped. The key to unlock the meaning of all this, and this is the most important thing that I'm going to share with you in this video, if you take away one thing from what I said, this is what you should take away. So the key to unlock all this is to acknowledge the dual nature of human existence. We humans are a microcosm, as any regular tradition will tell you, from east to west. A microcosm is a complete replica of the macrocosm. Seen this way, a human being is self-sufficient because he is whole by his nature. But beside being a microcosm, a human is also part of a macrocosm. So the same human being is a self-sufficient whole from one point of view, and a fragment in need of completion from a different point of view. We are all members of a larger reality in which we are an integral part to complete a whole. Erotic love and political art are both aimed to create a whole according to the image of the macrocosm, by uniting people. A marriage, as you can see from the shape of the ring that symbolizes it, is a world of its own, a microcosm that replicates the whole universe. A political community is an organism that is shaped also according to the rules that govern the universe in a complete whole, as we can see from the fact that every traditional society considers itself to be in the center of the universe and considers the other people to be on the periphery. In relation to the macrocosm, to the marriage covenant, and to the body politic, we are fragments in need of completion, and we are fragments that complete something. But as microcosms, we ourselves are complete images of the universe, self-sufficient and in need of no completion. In relation to the immortal gods, we are lesser beings and we owe them reverence and sacrifices, as we consider the human being as a fragment of a greater whole. In this case, the gods are higher beings than us humans, evidently. The Delphic admonition, know thyself, in the sense of know your place and give honor to the immortal gods, as mortal men should, refers to this state of affairs. But from another point of view, we are a complete microcosm and the gods are inherent in us. That is why someone like Plotinus could scandalize his circle of pious friends, declaring that it is the gods who should come to him, not him to the gods, and he declined their invitation to go to the temples. Behind the eloquent veil of myth, we can discern the following reality. The first fall of humanity corresponds to this change from the human being as a whole to the same being as a fragment. It is a change in the way we see ourselves and define what we are. In other words, what we lost is the consciousness of being a complete microcosm in need of no completion. That is why in the Silver Age we had to form political communities and we have to deal with erotic love. The paradox of political art and erotic love is that they both offer the solution to our incompleteness, but in the same time confirm it. The political community and Eros keep us in a bond that completes us, but in the same time keeps us fragments of a greater whole. An authentic and regular spiritual path will lead us back to the Golden Age, precisely in the sense that it will awaken in us the consciousness of and realization that we are a microcosm in need of no completion. This is the meaning of the lesser mysteries that René Guénon is talking about. I should add at this point that the fall of Adam that the book of Genesis is talking about is not the same as the fall from the Golden Age, as I have shown in my video about the Fallacy of Christian Esotericism. You'll find a link to it in the description. So the first cutting in half of the humans by Zeus corresponds to the change from the consciousness of being a whole to that of being an integral part of another whole. This is the first fall that lost to us the Golden Age. The second, cutting in two, then has to do with losing our consciousness of being parts of a greater ordered whole. And this is exactly what is happening right now around us. This is the second fall. The first fall has to do with ignorance. We lost our consciousness of being a whole ourselves, as microcosm. The second fall is also about ignorance. We are unable to realize our place in the grand scheme of things, and this manifests in the complete sexual decay, that is a betrayal of erotic love, and political chaos that disintegrates human societies. We are incapable to relate in a meaningful way to the opposite sex, and we are unable to relate in a meaningful way to the social order. We feel alienated from both, and we retreat in our own solipsism. And this is the very essence of the second fall, that makes erotic love and political order impossible. To take as self-sufficient whole our fallen self that has a legitimate existence only in relation to a greater whole. We are witnessing this fall before our very eyes, when we look on this individualist collectivism that erases the last traces of tradition and makes impossible the interaction of the sexes or of the differentiated social classes. I say individualist collectivism because that is what all this is. As we retreat in our fallen selves, we lose what defines us in relation to others and the whole, and we become a collection of amorphous individuals in an amorphous mass of people. When this cancelling out of all differentiation will be nearly complete, just as today the victor of the third estate over the clergy and the aristocracy is unchallenged, we will be in the middle of the last stage of the cycle, the Iron Age of the Iron Age. We are quite evidently not there yet, and there is still much of the power of the bourgeoisie that has to be destroyed. Both the social organization and the material infrastructure will be in ruins before we will be well in the last stage of the cycle. So I think that we are still lucky to live in the age that we live in. We still live in the residues of democracy or the rule of the third estate. But the future belongs to the fourth estate, the douloi, as the Greeks called them. The future belongs to doulocracy. If you found this video informative, please give it a thumb up and share it with your friends. If you have observations to make, or you think that I glossed over something that should have been said, or you think that I am simply wrong, share that in the comment box.